Hi, episode 27 here of this season, this year's attempt to squat double body weight. Yeah, I had a bit of a blip this week. The first time I've had a wobble in training since Christmas. So yeah, we're getting to 3 months now, which was not good, but I kind of think, well, if you have a full-time job and kids and what have you, eventually they're going to happen sometime, and it was this week for me. So upshot is I basically lost 4 activities, so 2 strength sessions and 2 cardio sessions this week. Wednesday basically of last week, got in the gym and I just felt absolutely empty. I had nothing in me whatsoever. I did like 3 or 4 reps at 95. I could barely get into the 0.5 kind of velocity space. So I just kind of went, today it's just not there, and chasing it on that particular day, I don't think would have done me any good. Just obviously my body was saying that you're not got it in you today, and resting is better than trying to persevering. Having said that, what then happened the next 2 or 3 days? We had snow days, so basically we got housebound for a few days because snow came down. Couldn't get to the gym, couldn't get out for exercise, and accompanying that, we've basically been stuck at home for a couple of days. Was like catastrophe theory kicked in. It was like, oh sod it, I'll just eat what I want. So intermittent fasting went out the window. Being mindful of the kind of foods I was eating went out the window. We just stuck at home all day, so I ate all sorts of crap. So yeah, that was like 3 or 4, 5 days at the very most, of basically not being as regimented and as consistent as I've been. So what, 3 or 4 days of the space of 3 months, probably I'm comfortable with that. Don't particularly want to repeat it, not aiming to do so, don't aspire to do so, but it is what it is. And on the scales this morning's weighing, it didn't do me any harm. Not made any progress, and I'll come to that in a minute, but it didn't do me any harm, and maybe I would have made some progress if it hadn't have happened. But maybe it was a blessing in disguise that Wednesday there was telling me that I was fatigued, and having 3 or 4 days off may have done me some long-term good in terms of going through the next phase of the program. But let's have a look at data and see what's happened. So here's our velocity data. I'll go through these in a bit more detail, but there's a gap there, and those gaps represent those 2 missed sessions. So I wanted to make sure that was visible there, so I could see as a mental cue when I look at this graph that I did miss 2 sessions, and if I'd have left it as like a continuous sequence, I probably would have kind of gone, oh, everything was good there. But no, I did miss 2 sessions. I'll make this slightly bigger. Yeah, so I came back and a bit of a mixed picture. So this first session back, the velocity was almost identical to the last one I went away from. But the marker, I think, for me that was more encouraging than the overall mean value was I managed to push it up into the 0.7 range. So this error bar here represents the fastest repetition. You probably can't see it that well, but the error bar, the positive error bar is the fastest repetition, and the bottom of the negative error bar is the slowest repetition. So what I can see here is compared to the previous session where I actually had a much more narrow range of velocities, I had a much broader range. That means my upper performance capacity had gone up, I'd increased in strength capacity, but that came at a cost of more fatigue was accrued, and therefore the velocity at the end of the set had dropped down. This far right bar was today. I actually felt pretty good today when I went to the gym, warmed up, and I felt okay, and then just the velocity just seemed to kind of just go away from me. And I trained a bit earlier in the day than I normally do. Whether that's had a bit of an impact on that, I don't know. But I say I felt okay when I did it. But sometimes you don't have days where you're at your optimal. It wasn't a bad day, not like the last week, but it just didn't feel like I could kind of push as fast as I was doing on Monday. But I'm hoping by Friday that'll have turned around a little bit. I'll probably train a little bit later in the day on Friday, and hopefully those numbers will be above and beyond. So hopefully trying to get above the 0.6 set average. So I anticipated 9 sessions for this particular load. So I think I've done 6 at the minute. So I'm probably about right. But what I've done there is I had two kind of very slow sets, and then I've hit 4 very consistently, and then kind of the mid to high 0.5. So rather than having this kind of linear increase in velocity from the low to the high, I've kind of jumped up a bit and then stayed relatively stable, and then maybe I'll have another jump into the next kind of bracket above, into the 0.6s. Who knows? So what I've kind of gone from there is into looking at power. Now, power isn't necessarily that important in terms of actual pure strength, although anything where it's force and velocity is power, because you're moving. But it helps keep an idea on progress when your velocities all the time have to drop down. So if you look at the velocity, it will go up and it will drop down, it will go up and it will drop down, because as you add more weight, you'll have that decline in velocity. Whereas hopefully what would happen is power will be relatively stable in its development. Now you can see here we have dip, so it'll dip because the increase in load is not in that optimal kind of range for me to produce power, but then as I get stronger that'll come up. But as you can see a positive trend. If I go back a slide, that velocity will always be kind of consistently around that 0.5, 0.6, because I'm not trying to get faster overall. I'm just trying to get back to the level and drop the weight, get back to the level and drop it. So I always have this kind of wave-like effect. Whereas over time, power should increase as a trend, and if you can see there, that's generally as a trend. So it starts off around the low 400s, and as I've gone through training, I'm kind of pushing up towards the 600 mark, and then 600s and 700s, and so on and so forth. So yeah, dipped a little bit today, but hopefully by end of the week, I'm up around that kind of a mean set average mean power for the set is around about 600 watts. So that's kind of where I'm going, and that's a nice kind of way for me to demonstrate or visually see my development over this phase. You can see there, well, it's not a very smooth straight line. There's a definite trend of increasing power output in the same exercise. So moving more weight faster, more power output is there. So the other thing I was interested in was, as a side effect, is how this might affect my weightlifting. Because in the long term, what I like to be is back into the masters weightlifting. So these are the velocities. So for those who haven't seen before, at the beginning of each session I either do 3 cleans at 70 kilos or 3 snatches at 50 kilos, and I keep them really consistent. I can do at the beginning and end of a warm-up, so it's like my potentiation before I do the lifting, and I can measure that, 3 reps, the average, the mean power for each rep, set average, and then divide that by body weight. So that's kind of how I've done that one. So it's like a measurement of my power output that I can do every single session. So what had happened was, I basically have seen slightly, well, really, you can see they're really quite erratic, but now I'm starting to see a bit of an upward trend in power output for the cleans. But over the course of this, so let's see, where are we? Christmas. So Christmas is quite towards the far end. So this is basically starting off back from April 2022. So this is almost 12 months of data. So it's only really the far right hand side that I've been really interested in. And if you can go back to, as you can see here, there was a real dip, and I was thinking, well, why, if I'm getting stronger, why is this dipping down? But the cleans are starting to improve in that power output. But the snatch is staying relatively consistent. So it may well be that actually snatch performance has got really very little to do with back squat, but cleans maybe more so. So as you can see from the previous slide, that squatting power has improved. Clean power is starting to improve, but snatch hasn't really changed that much at all. So there's lots of task specificity there, so I can't infer one thing from the other. And the last one, again, the pun is deliberate here, the elephant in the room, body composition. So again, I moved away from looking at body mass, and body mass has stayed relatively consistent, so kind of around about the 94, 95 kilo mark. Hasn't really gone up, hasn't really gone down for quite a few months, but I kind of moved away from that into looking at girth or segment measurements, girth measurements. So particularly the top line is chest, and I've got waist, so hips, waist, and then right thigh girth. So I suppose the thing I can see there is like a 2 centimetre increase in thigh girth. So that tells me something quite important. Somebody at mid-40s now, to see thigh muscular hypertrophy is quite quite reassuring and quite pleasing. Wasn't a particular goal, but showing some kind of adaptive response and some hypertrophic response. And obviously, I'm looking from a longevity point of view, maintaining and increasing muscle mass with age is quite positive in terms of maintaining health status. So that's good. Having some big quads is not a bad thing. Bad for buying jeans, but apart from that, it's pretty good. Chest has remained relatively consistent. I did go up and came down a bit, and both hip and waist have continued the downward trend, but have remained stable and consistent. And that's probably because my inconsistencies in sticking to the things that I think will get me to down a weight will be up. So sometimes I'm good, sometimes I'm bad, and that's going to keeping me holding steady. So I need to be a bit more consistent, both in the number of days I kind of time restrict eat, and then within those days what things I allow myself to eat. So positive news that I've kind of maintained abdominal health and girth measurements, and a slight increase in thigh girth, demonstrating kind of a hypertrophic response, and that's kind of complemented obviously alongside the increase in strength and power. Just need to get the fucking gut now, don't I? And then I'll be sweet. Mid 94s. There's a little kind of carrot dangling in the corner of my eye, which is that the weight categories for masters weightlifting is under 96s and under 89s. So I'm already comfortable with the 96s. I don't think I need to worry about that. As long as I kind of do what I'm doing, I'll always be in the 96s. Could I get to 89? I can't remember. I don't think I've ever been 89 kilos, not as an adult. But is it worth a bit of a bash and drop down the weight category? I don't know. Probably not. But me being silly. But maybe. That's me for today, and I'll see you next week.